So thank you everyone for joining us. And Dr. Somsky, thank you so much for spending some time with us here. We really appreciate you and taking the time. And this is organized primarily, I guess, by Sarah and Judy in Parkinson's Community Los Angeles. I'm sure that most of you are aware of what we're doing and how we're working in the community. One of our objectives here is outreach and education. And so I guess I'll just turn it over. Judy, if you have any closing remarks or opening remarks you want to say before we let Nick take over.
Basically, I just, I think, is everybody from Southern California? I know we have someone from Northern California. I recognize Elizabeth. Anyone else? But otherwise, everyone's Southern California. Okay, there's still people coming on, Nick, but I'm going to just add them as if you want to start because we want to be mindful of your time. I really appreciate it. For those of you that don't know, Dr. Nicholas Sumsky, movement disorder specialist at Cedars-Sinai, and he is an amazing doctor that is known for thinking out of the box and really spending time with his patients and looking at solutions on different options. So the way this came about is Sandy and I had an appointment with him and we were talking about, and it was on Telemed, and he thought it might be helpful to discuss what it's like to do a Telemed appointment and to let people know that it's really okay. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Nicholas Sumsky, and you can do it.
You want to make him spotlight so he's big, and,
okay,
and then also Judy's going to mute everybody. You will have the ability to unmute yourself.
We have a lot more people coming. How do I spotlight that, Patrick?
I think you highlight over it. There should be like a corner. Let me see here. Yeah, I can't. And then, Dr. Somsky, I think if you turn your phone the other way, we'll get more image of you. Your screen will.
Spotlight video. There we go. Okay.
There it is. Oh, look at that.
All right.
It's all Nick.
It's Nicholas much, but okay.
Yes, we've got you. And I'll just keep adding people in as we go. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Patrick and Judy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with everybody. Looking over the list, I see a lot of familiar faces and names. Of course, a lot of people I have not had the pleasure to meet. Normally, in a real-life forum, I am a big fan of people just speaking up, raising their hand, or even blurting out questions. That doesn't work quite as well on this system, but hopefully we'll have a chance to really answer a lot of questions. I'm just now discovering where the chat box is myself, so I can keep an eye on it. So, the idea of having a talk about telemedicine and Parkinson's did truly arise out of having a telemedicine visit for Parkinson's, as this is something that even for doctors, that perhaps especially for doctors, that we're still getting used to. We're still developing how the system is going to work, what its advantages are, what its disadvantages are. And so it's a work in progress. I think in the month plus since we started doing telemedicine visits, I think I've used 4 different platforms to do those visits, as well as a couple others for personal use. Like this is actually the first time I've used Zoom for anything related to Parkinson's. I've used it for friends and family before, but there are a lot of different platforms, and that's one of the issues that I want to touch on. First, I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about was just being prepared. Preparation for a telemedicine visit might seem a little different compared to what you're used to. The need to get into a car, the need to go to an office, it sort of triggers certain things we might prepare. We might prepare ourselves to go to that office by grabbing our medication bottles or a medication list or some questions we've written down. And I would encourage people to think about a telemedicine visit in much the same way. We definitely would like you to have your most up-to-date medications, if that means having them next to you. Our office, and I think many offices, are calling in advance of the doctor part to go over a medication list, review allergies, just update the chart, much like you would as you were getting put into a room in the office. Another thing that we're asking patients to do, and I'm sure this is going on in other offices, we're actually having patients, to the extent that they can, take their own vital signs. So that means if you have a blood pressure cuff or a thermometer, or can just find your pulse on your wrist, we'll ask you for those numbers, because it gives us access to data that otherwise would be lost in telemedicine. But we can still get it if you're willing to participate and help us out a little bit. Let's see, other things that I wanted to talk about. One issue is, I guess, illustrated by the fact that what I did for this visit or this talk sort of drove home some of the points I want to make. I realized as I sat down in front of my iPad that I didn't have Zoom installed on my iPad. I have it on my phone. I realized that I hadn't logged into it before, so suddenly I was scrambling to make sure that I could get into it pretty quickly, and then it asked for all the setup stuff. So that's one point to make. Before you have your telemedicine visit, practice. Have a chance to go through whatever platform they're going to be using with you. Ask them, ask the office if they can actually go through it with you. If you're not totally comfortable with it, if you haven't used it before, can they just have a sham visit or a practice visit where you log in and they can help you troubleshoot sound problems, video problems, login problems, and so forth. And right down to, oops, I forgot to download the app, as I just illustrated myself. All of those things have happened and will happen. But to the extent that you're ready to navigate those in advance, you'll have a much more efficient visit once the actual telemedicine visit starts. On the heels of that, I would encourage everybody to be flexible. And by that, I mean, things do go wrong. We have internet problems, phone problems, incompatibility issues with certain operating systems and phones and computers and whatnot. And so sometimes we go out of our preferred platform and we'll go into plan B, or sometimes even plan C. And so we encourage people to be ready for that. Some of those are more straightforward than others. So as an example, which is true for Cedars and maybe true of other institutions, we have our primary system is one that works through Epic, the chart system. And so people have downloaded their Epic app onto their phone or iPad or computer, and they can basically log into their visit. That's preferred simply because it's attached to their chart, and it's also known to be HIPAA compliant. That's an issue that's kind of a bigger one than I want to get into too much detail today. But in other words, the government prior to COVID had determined that this system and some others are secure enough, safe enough for your personal health information to be considered protected. So they are HIPAA compliant, meaning they are protecting your information. In the wake of COVID and all the changes it brought along, some platforms were brought into the umbrella of HIPAA without necessarily having changed their security. So you may have heard a few instances of Zoom, for instance, being hacked by people who had less than honorable intentions. And so Zoom is currently allowable for use in telemedicine, but I have a feeling that unless it changes dramatically in the next several months, when COVID passes, Zoom may go back to being off the list. Also added to the list that you're probably familiar with, FaceTime was not on that list, but it is for COVID, and there are a few other examples. We are trying, at least I am trying, to gravitate towards ones that are HIPAA compliant in hopes that when COVID passes, and it will pass one day, we may still be able to use some of these platforms for the advantages that have nothing to do with viruses. And so we're getting used to using the ones that are HIPAA compliant prior to COVID so that we can use them post-COVID. That being said, like I said, we have to be nimble, we have to be flexible. Sometimes we have problems with one platform and we have to jump to another. Other ones that you may run across that we're using one that's called DoxyMe. spelled DOXY.me, which is a website that doesn't involve any additional setup. You basically log into a room. So Dr. Me or DoxyMe/Dr. Sumsky, I think, is mine. It has a virtual waiting room. You log in. I can see who's waiting. I can pick who I want to talk to. I can send messages almost as though you're sitting in a waiting room. And one of the nice things about that one is that it just involves a text message. So if I have your cell phone number and I text you a link, then you're off and running. All you have to do is open that link and you are on my page, and I can join the room and we can start talking. So that has the advantage of minimum setup. Has a couple other features, but it's disconnected from the chart. So it's operating without the chart having any idea that we're talking, which from your end probably doesn't make a lot of difference. Another one that people are kind of getting the hang of is one that's called Doximity. That sounds a lot like DoxyMe, which is a little bit of an unfortunate coincidence. Doximity is a doctor-based social network, which is similar to a LinkedIn or a Facebook for physicians, but it has in it, for a long time, it's had a dialer where we can call people using our phone, and the number that will come up actually is our office number, so you don't get our home cell phone. But they recently added a video feature that adds the ability for us to call people without using our number, like on FaceTime. There are others. I'm sure there are many others. Some will, I think, survive COVID and blossom and become, better and better, and some will go back to being more appropriate to just talking to the family and grandkids and college roommates and things like that. I want to make sure I'm going to check the chat here just in case anyone's added a message or a question. Please do feel free to alert me at any time. So other thing that I wanted to talk about, the fact that you guys are already on this talk means you're about 2/3 of the way there. You're ready for a visit already, because you've gotten on here and you figured out how to use your camera, how to use your audio. I encourage people not to get too worried about what their place looks like, whether they've had a chance to brush their hair, tidy up. Because believe me, I'm at home too when I'm seeing patients, and I don't want you to see what my floor looks like any more than you want me to see yours. So, just look at my beautiful clean ceiling. Don't get too worked up about that. We've had a few people actually refuse to be seen on video, I think partly out of fear that they would not be able to do it right, and just didn't really want to try, and partly sometimes because I think they were self-conscious about how they look or how their place looks, things like that. I think, for a medical visit, that's something I would encourage people to try to look past. This is a great opportunity to get to see people in their native space, which does mean, any flaws that come with it. But the other day I was speaking with a patient who, when I've seen him in the office, he actually doesn't have Parkinson's. He had a major stroke. But the best I can really do is watch him walk up and down the hall. And he does a pretty good job with his walker. And, we talk about how to solve problems at home. The visit we had this past week was actually it was pretty special, because I got to watch him use this apparatus they had put into their ceiling to help him get out of a chair and do exercises. I watched him walk around his entire house. They navigated through a bathroom, through a little doorway that they had to jerry-rig because it wasn't wide enough, and so he had to turn sideways and go through it, and how to get to his bedroom, how to get to his exercise room. And along the way, they made some comments like, oops, the bed's not made, and so forth. But more importantly, I really actually got to see him navigate his world. And it was informative to me as a doctor, because we were talking about solutions to how to avoid falls, how to make him more mobile, and actually watching him walk around his own space with his walker, I changed my recommendations significantly about what I thought would be useful to him, because what I saw was that this guy had developed tremendous skills and ability with his walker. Like he was actually doing a very good job. And so for me to make a useful recommendation, I actually had to alter what it was I was trying to bring to the table, because some of the things I thought would be useful to him, he had mastered. He was way beyond. So keep that in mind in your own interactions with your doctors. You may give them an opportunity to see something that, can you guys still hear me? I'm seeing a screen come up that I'm not familiar with. Here we go. So it may be useful for me or for your physician to watch you navigate actual challenges that you have. I can think of another case, a patient of mine who, this is before telemedicine, but we were having trouble trying to figure out, because he had freezing of gait. There was this instance where one time he was able to walk down a hallway in his house, go around a corner, and navigate through his home in a way that left everyone a little stunned, because normally he had so much trouble walking. And so one visit, I was trying to get the lay of the land, like for them to explain what was different about this space, or what would the hallway look like, and so forth. And they did their best, but you know, you can only go so far to explain that. But at a subsequent visit, they actually brought a video where his spouse walked that same path and actually showed me, here's the hallway and here's where he went, and this is the part where he did so successfully. It was actually helpful because we were able to try to extract from that what about that area made it potentially successful, and how could we transfer that to other areas of the house? How could we make his gait freeze less? How can we put fewer obstacles in his way? And so it was helpful because they could try to explain it all day, but I couldn't really visualize it until they videotaped it. And so that's something that we now have the opportunity to do in a visit, because you can actually say, these right here are the stairs I have trouble with, or this is my favorite chair and I have a hard time getting out of this chair. What do you recommend? And we can actually change that visit. I think that'll be, I don't know if physical and occupational therapists have gotten to a point where they're going to be able to do video visits, but those kind of questions could come up a lot in those kinds of realms. If not live, then you could record them, because there's a lot of opportunity to try to address your challenges in your native space. All right, let's see. One other thing I had put on here, which now I sort of missed the opportunity to slip it in as a joke, but it did come up recently. I don't know if any of you saw a correspondent for one of the major news networks was caught when the camera panned a little bit and the bar across the bottom with his name disappeared. It became clear he wasn't wearing pants. So pants are highly, highly recommended during your visits. He actually was wearing shorts, luckily, and I'll, truth be told, I'm wearing shorts now too. So, but just keep that in mind. He thought he was going to be safe, but the angle changed just a little bit, and some of the graphics disappeared from the screen, and suddenly it was pretty clear that there was nothing under his shirt. And a small scandal ensued before it became clear at least he did have shorts on. So keep that in mind. Any questions or any comments?
Is there any way that we can see what sites that use this are compliant with HIPAA?
I think the best way to find out would be just to do a Google search. It's a pretty short list, as I understand it. And the ones that were added for COVID was also a pretty short list. It was Zoom, FaceTime, and one other one that I can't remember because I wasn't familiar with it at all. And so it's not a long list at all, but it may grow. There may be opportunities. Some company that has thought of themselves as a purely social network might see this as being a way to integrate themselves into the medical world. So there may be new options. WhatsApp, actually, that's one that's hasn't yet come into fruition. I haven't used it for this, but because it's long been known to be highly secure compared to most networking systems, I think that one also may come into the ball game because it's been used for a long time for that reason.
Dr. Somsky, we have a question from Lisa Lunsner in Redondo Beach. Just diagnosed with Parkinson's by local neurologist on March 9th in the middle of this COVID crisis, unable to get an MRI and DAT scan until mid-June. Can our first appointment with a movement disorder specialist be done via telemedicine, or should they see the specialist in person?
So there's a lot of ways to, there are layers to that question. So an ideal visit would still be in person. To be certain about a diagnosis, to really get a handle on someone's symptoms and findings, I need to lay hands, feel the tone in your body, watch you move in certain ways, be there firsthand. So I would, if someone is in the midst of being diagnosed or getting a second opinion about diagnosis, in other words, if there is uncertainty, there's got to be a high priority placed on getting face-to-face with your doctor as soon as it's practical. That being said, if the diagnosis is fairly well in hand, and you're, say, changing doctors or looking at new ways to try treating somebody, a first visit by video actually is feasible, pretty reasonable. In fact, in my own practice, there are plenty of cases where I see patients who have been well established with Parkinson's, and they come to me trying to fine-tune medications and troubleshoot problems. I focus on those problems and the troubleshooting, and sometimes don't examine them to the second or third visit because I'm not really trying to establish the diagnosis. I'm trying to iron problems out as quickly as we can get to them. So a first visit is possible. It's just if there are questions about what's going on or what is this, a phone visit or a video visit is not going to provide quite enough information to really be able to nail that. There are a couple issues that are worth thinking about that are more pragmatic, which is that up until COVID, telemedicine visits like the ones we're talking about were not routinely covered by insurance. There were exceptions. You had to live basically, somewhere in the middle of nowhere in order to justify to an insurance company that you needed telemedicine. And that decision-making was led by, as it often is, by Medicare. So basically, telemedicine visits were very difficult to justify to Medicare. With COVID, those justifications have become presumed. We are basically able to see anyone and everyone by telemedicine now, and most, if not all, of the insurance companies have followed suit. So that means your visits, including now, that for a minute that wasn't quite the case, but including new patient visits, they are now considered doctor's visits in every way, shape, and form. That means there may be issues related to copays and deductibles. So I encourage you to talk to the offices you're working with about those so you don't have surprises. In many cases, the copays have actually been waived as people are being put in this position without, in essence, without a lot of choice in the matter. And so, but that may evolve as well. So just keep in mind, like any other visit, copays and deductibles may apply. However, unlike some of those visits, gas, getting stuck on the freeway, parking costs, those do not apply. And so there may still be, financial benefits, not to mention convenience benefits, to just having to visit from the, comfort of your own living room. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Dr. Subsky, we have a couple things. The last person that asked the question asked, are you taking new patients? That was one last question.
Yes, we are, and it's a challenge because our schedule is all amuck because of COVID, but we certainly are in theory.
Okay, and then also from Robert LeVar, he said, I read recently that outpatient visits across specialties are down up to 60 to 70%. Is that just the pressure on the healthcare system? Is it institutional policies versus patients hesitating to come in?
That's a really interesting question because I think the answer may have been different each of the past 4 or 5 weeks. Initially, it was a mutual, let's stay the heck away from each other. Everyone was just worried about spreading things. And so, frankly, doctors didn't want to see patients if they didn't have to. Patients didn't want to see doctors if they didn't have to. And no one wanted to sit in a waiting room with someone else if they didn't have to. That has continued to a fair degree. People are still wary about going to doctor's offices. There's a lot of concern, in fact, that people are not going to the emergency room for things not related to COVID that normally would send them in a heartbeat, like crushing chest pain, or why can't I move one side of my body? Those kinds of things would get people to call 911 instantly before. There is an awareness that people are waiting longer and longer and longer into emergency situations to go to the emergency room. And that's still true today, even though most emergency rooms, I will point out, will triage you immediately in different directions. If you are there with a stroke, you will go into a part of the ER that has no respiratory symptoms. The people who are coughing are over there somewhere at Cedars. They're actually outside in a tent in a parking lot. It's more fancy than it sounds, but it's very segregated out. So you're not sitting next to people coughing while you're dealing with a heart attack or a stroke. So keep that in mind. If you're that sick, you need to go to the emergency room, please go. But you can imagine if that's the case for emergency room visits, how that translates to routine visits to see a doctor, or even urgent visits to see a doctor. People are deferring them out of fear and concern. There are, on our end, challenges to maintaining throughput and availability. I'm seeing patients 4 days out of the week from home, and one day I'm going into the office to see patients exclusively at the moment for Botox, because we have not figured out how to do Botox through a camera. So the other days of the week, it's all from home, but because we are still learning how to use these platforms, and our patients are still learning, how to download the right app and where to log in and so forth, each visit takes just a little longer than it might have in the past. And so it's hard to stay full and busy in the same sense, because one person having some technical difficulties can throw off the whole day. So that's one of the reasons why capacity remains lower, because we're still struggling with how do you actually fit people into your day. Staffing issues are going on because we see less patients. We can't have as many people in the office. So some of our staff are being, they've been repurposed in urgent care environments and things like that where they need more bodies, which means that as we try to ramp up in speed, we can't go quite as quickly as we might otherwise until we call those people back. I suspect some practices are humming along at nearly full speed. We're getting closer and closer in neurology. Some practices have ground to a halt because they did not have means for incorporating technology or how to, a way to adapt to this new system. And I think they just kind of, in some cases fizzled because they didn't have support or enough foresight to know exactly how to handle all of this. So I think when you average it together, that's where you get the numbers like you said, was about 2/3 capacity. But I think a lot of centers are actually close to full capacity now. It's just taken a lot of adaptation to get there.
We had one comment from John Bassett. He says, slightly off topic, but can you comment about Ongentys? Is that, am I saying that correctly? Ongentys?
Your guess is as good as mine. I think it's Ongentys, but
okay.
Who knows? So yes, Ongentys was just FDA approved, I believe, yesterday. I just saw it yesterday. Mm-hmm. It is a new COMT inhibitor. So if anybody here is familiar with Comtan or entacapone, which is an ingredient in Stalevo, this is a new medication in that category. It's called opicapone. It's been available for several years in Europe. And what it offers that's different from what we have now, the entacapone, if I want to add entacapone to your levodopa regimen, I have to give you a dose with every dose of levodopa. And so if you take it 4 times a day, you have to take 4 entacapone pills. They are big. They are unwieldy. They are the least popular pills in Parkinson's because they're very hard to swallow. And so the idea of saying, hey, let's ramp up your medications a little bit. Here's 4 new gigantic pills to take every day. Hasn't proven terribly popular. I used to use a lot of it. It has really tailed off in my practice for practical reasons. What makes this medicine different, opicapone, is that in order to add it to your levodopa regimen, you take 1 pill a day, and the pill is very, very tiny. It's a tiny little capsule. So the sort of personal price to adding it, the challenge, the discomfort or inconvenience to adding it is now very, very small. Remains to be seen what costs are going to look like, how available samples will be, how insurance will cover this, and so forth. But I'm actually pretty excited about it because when Comtan was new itself, I used it a lot because the idea of it boosting your levodopa was pretty handy and pretty helpful. It just proved to be, it came in a form that was just too unwieldy. It wasn't worth the trouble. So to have that power back in the form of a single 1 time a day capsule, I'm pretty intrigued by the idea. I think that could be very, very useful for a lot of people. There are other medicines that kind of fit that bill. If you think of a category just not by mechanism, but rather we'll call it a category of how do you add 1 pill to your day and try to enhance the whole day. The other things in that category include like Azlect or Xadago, or one of the long-acting dopamine agonists like Nupro or Mirapex ER, Requip XL. All of those are examples of how do you add to your day without having to add to each dose. How do you boost the whole day with just a single time of day dosing? And we've had more and more ingredients, more and more medications enter that sphere. And as of yesterday, we have 1 more.
Okay, there's another question here from Ron. With respect to being the second opinion, how should hard copy documents, i.e. EMG results, be presented to you during the telemedicine visit, as opposed to anticipating the need for the EMG results and pre-scanning and emailing it?
Pre-scanning and emailing probably is optimal if you have the opportunity to do that, or discuss it with your individual office that you're working with. If you're working with our office and you use our chart system actually allows you personally to upload your own documents directly to the chart, so we can review them later, which is kind of handy. Sometimes we have to search for them a little bit, but at least it puts a hard copy there that we can review at any time. And if you do that in advance, the office can make sure that it's been received, that they can see it, that way they know that we can see it when the visit actually starts. So I think that probably is your best bet to plan ahead. That being said, if you want to hold something up and show it to us, I've done a little bit of reading on the screen of certain results. One case I had a patient actually read the result to me. Some patients have told me the highlights of their labs, the ones that are abnormal and so forth. Not ideal, but gets some of the main messages across. But optimally, if you have some hard data, if you have some old reports and you think it'd be relevant, anything you can do to get them a copy of them electronically in our hands before that visit would be ideal for your sake. So we have as much information as we can get.
Thank you. Are there any other burning questions that anyone may have?
You want to take everybody off mute and bring us together?
Yeah, let's see if I can unmute.
Pat Young has a question.
I've just unmuted all now, so if there's anyone that has a question. Yeah.
I would actually like to ask a question if I could. This whole idea of video medicine is fantastic. This is obviously from my father. It was a nightmare trying to get my parents to remotely to be able to turn on their Zoom app and the whole thing. Are you working, or is Cedars working in anything that's a little bit more simple, 1 click, not in the body of an email, but just 1 click here? Or are you considering a simple, when it's time for an appointment, you FaceTime your patient or whatever the equivalent is on Android to make it as simple as possible? Because I fear that you're going to run into a lot of patients like my parents who have no clue how to use their iPhones, iPads, and if they do, if they have a son like me, great. But otherwise, for those that don't, you know, it's really a big, big challenge.
It is a challenge, and it's especially challenged because what people consider easy is in the eye of the beholder. So, for instance, you mentioned FaceTime as like, oh, that would be a simple way of doing this. I can say with great confidence with my own father, after years of time with him, he still hasn't figured it out. And so FaceTime baffles some people. Zoom seems straightforward if you use it for business. It's a little, this is only like the time I've been on it, and it still is a little foreign to me.
It just has a lot of pop-ups and whatnot with Zoom. There's a lot of things that pop up, and it's not like when you click the link that you guys sent, which is great, and it's great you're doing it. It just it asks. There's a million little things that pop up, and you want internet audio. For my 81-year-old mother, it was overwhelming.
Yeah. So the one I mentioned, Doxy, that's the one that we use as sort of the plan, you know, plan C, plan D if needed, because it involves a text. If somebody can open a text, if their phone dings and they can see the text and they click all they have to do is click the text of the text, because it'll be a blue hyperlink. If they click on that, they are in the room. That's all they have to do is just find the text and click the link. And that's, to me, that's about as simple as we can get for someone who really has the least knowledge of what's going on with their family. In other cases, sometimes, you know, we have to try a few different things. Some people find, for instance, logging into the chart is not a big deal. Perhaps they've been doing it to review their records or communicate with their doctor by email for a long time. So video for them is just one more button to push. For others, like I said, they don't have the app. And so from the very beginning, they're dealing with login issues. And as you said, pop up, do you want this? Should we enable that? And, you know, it can be baffling, which is why having a family member who can kind of navigate that is helpful, or just being willing to navigate it with the office staff. Because in most cases, not most cases, if you make it through once, after that, the second, the third time, you know, a lot more straightforward. And so if you can do a dry run with the office staff or family member, oftentimes the next time will be easier. But the DoxyMe is the one we've used most frequently when we just run into the situation where the person we're talking to really has trouble troubleshooting their end of things. And we say, well, here, just try it. Can you just click this link? And it's worked pretty darn well.
Okay, and Nick, we have, there's two more questions. We have a few that have been off topic. So I think we'll just address these last two, if that's okay with everyone. Mark Siegel has asked, can you speak to the relationship briefly about PD and COVID-19? I think that's probably a broader topic than what we have time for right now, but is there, and I'll throw this second one out to you. We have heard of a Parkinson's inhaler. What is it?
Okay, and I see Bob's to have I treated any COVID patients? So,
oh yeah.
So I can speak to those actually pretty quickly. The COVID questions, I have personally not seen any patients with COVID and neurological symptoms. As it turned out, I was last rotating in the hospital seeing patients with residents for the 2 weeks, about a week before everything hit the fan, as they say. So there were rumors of people in the hospital who had COVID. The hospital at that point was being very tight-lipped about it. So I'm, in hindsight, though there were COVID patients around, I wasn't seeing them. But we knew the whole thing was kind of brewing. But by the time I was out of the hospital, or I guess I was out of the hospital, then came the real wave, the shelter in place and so forth. So colleagues of mine have been seeing patients, but I have not been in the hospital to when it comes to COVID and Parkinson's,
Sorry, someone is talking.
Yes.
Okay, I've got to go back.
Mute everybody. Just mute everybody.
Yeah, let me go back to what is it?
Oh.
So when it comes to COVID and Parkinson's, I don't know of any specific linkages to date that would go beyond simply the warning of trying to avoid COVID if you're of advanced age or if you have other health issues or comorbidities. In other words, it sounds like a bad idea to get COVID in general. It sounds like a worse idea to get COVID if you have Parkinson's, but I don't have specific.
Yeah.
And then the third question was about the inhaler for Parkinson's. So the inhaler is a medicine called Inbrija. It looks like, yep, there we go. Judy is actually holding up an example of the Inbrija inhaler. It is a powdered version of levodopa. So it is basically the same active ingredient as your Cinemet or your Rytari, except it's in powder form, and you breathe it in order to get it into your system. It actually goes into your bloodstream through the lung tissue. The potential advantages of that, it gets there quickly. It skips over your stomach, where a pill might have to sit for a while, mingling with your lunch until your stomach decided it was time to pass it along to the small intestine, because that's where the absorption takes place. So it skips over that delay, and so it can get into people's systems more quickly. Downsides, it takes a little bit of dexterity to get it ready to go. For some people, that's been not a problem, but others find it a little bit, just not as easy as taking a pill. A few people, if you breathe too fast, like if you're familiar with an inhaler for asthma, for instance, where there's some force involved, sort of if you breathe like that with Inbrija, you'll breathe way too fast, and all the powder will overwhelm you. So I've had people cough and gag from that. So it's really one thing to keep in mind if you do use it, is that it's meant to be breathed in easily, just sort of, and it's sort of a natural pace. But keeping all those things in mind, for some people, Inbrija has proven to be very useful, very flexible, handy, sort of something you can just make use of when you need it here and there. You don't need water. You don't need a pill cutter. It's a little more durable in your pocket than maybe a pill in a pill case. For some people, it's proven to be unnecessarily complicated, or to be fair, or it just hasn't provided a tremendous advantage over taking a little extra Cinemet. They find that at 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Is this a basic Cinemet or an
Cinemet is cheaper and easier to get a hold of from an insurance purpose than Inbrija. But if it's something you haven't tried, if you're dealing with off times, especially ones that are somewhat unpredictable, where you'd like to get back on track quickly, it might be something worth talking about with your Parkinson's doctor.
So I would like to thank Dr. Shumsky so much for this wonderful.
I didn't even hear one sentence.
Oh, you know what, Alan? We have it.
I can't believe you didn't get back to me.
We have it recording, so you will be able to hear the whole thing.
We were busy. We were working with the people that know how to get online.
I understand. Hi, Dr. Shumsky.
I think you were in a different Zoom room is what I think happened. But
we'll get it worked out.
We'll figure this all out. But we do have it recording, and with Dr. Shumsky's approval,
they must be doing it.
The website. But I do want to thank everyone for listening in and being part of this. A couple things I'd like to just mention, that we have several of our board members on today with us. We have Barbara Rubens, Stephen Rubens, Sandy Yaris. I'm Judy Yaris. We have Laura Kurtenbach. We have Patrick Lasasso, who's the president, Bob Potter, who is our vice president, and also we have Sarah King, who is the information and referral specialist. So when you send to info@Parkinson's Community LA or info@PCLA.org, you will be in touch with Sarah. And she is amazing. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to say something, and I can spotlight you for 2 seconds here so people can put a face with the name. But
sure. Hi, everybody.
Everybody goes to gallery view also to bring everybody back together.
Bring everybody back to gallery view. There we go. Okay. Sarah is amazing and wonderful, and we are so grateful to have
that part
of our team. Did I leave anyone else off the board? I got everybody that's here from the board.
Well, Mark is on an iPhone looking at.
I'm sorry, Mark is on via phone.
Mark's right here on my phone.
There's Mark on Sarah's phone. Okay. He's been having some technical difficulties getting into Zoom, but he's been doing it through FaceTime. The other thing I wanted to mention is tomorrow we have a support group at 1 p.m. That's usually our Friday Culver City support group. And then next week, there will be our weekly Tuesday support group at 11 o'clock. And our support groups have been amazing. We've had a lot of great discussion about Ambrosia, about medications, how to put your pants on, exercise. Patrick Lasasso has been doing incredible exercise classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You can go to Smart XPD, am I correct?
Well, yeah, you can email me at PCLA. Just probably, it's easier, Patrick at PCLA.org.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 10:30 a.m. class, 3 days a week, free. And we got people from all over the world, Canada, Israel. We had 41 people yesterday. So it's a good group. And you get, like this, you kind of feel like you're with other people, which is really important right now, the socialization aspect that we're really missing.
Can you say the email address again?
Patrick at PCLA.org. And then that's just easy to remember. I'll transfer you over to my other email and I'll put you on the list and send you an invite. This was great.